clue what he looks like. So even if you walk down here, I wouldn't recognize him.
That's him there.
Huh?
That's him there. He's just
Oh,
with Judy.
oh, good.
I'll just go and shake his hand. Good morning, everybody. My name's Sarah Kay. I'm the chair of the French department, and as of very recent date, the director of the Center for French Civilization and Culture. And it's my very great pleasure to welcome everyone here this morning for the opening of our colloquium on global French theatre, Pour un théâtre au monde. This conference has been made possible by generous funding from the Florence Gould Foundation, the Centre itself, the College of Arts and Sciences at NYU, and the Cultural Services of the French Embassy. And I'd also like to thank, in this preliminary words, the people who have given so much support to the conference, including Lise Landau, Emmanuel Hernandez, Rachel Watson, and Guillaume Parodi. I owe a special debt to 3 senior colleagues and theatre people who helped put this program together. I'm by training and profession a medievalist, and organizing a conference on modern French theatre was quite a stretch. I couldn't have done this without the help of the 3 people that I referred to as les trois mousquetaires, the 3 theatre specialists who've taken on the responsibility of organizing each of them a table ronde, which I think will be one of the main features of this conference. So I'm referring, of course, to Judy Miller, Christian Billet, and Richard Schechner. This conference is dedicated to the founder-director of the Center for French Civilization and Culture, Tom Bishop, who I think is well known to everybody in the room, much better known than I am. Tom has been a professor at NYU since 1956. We just celebrated 60 years of his service here and his leadership in the university, where he continues to teach as the Florence Gould Professor of French, a name which he took in 1974. He founded the center in 1978, and it functioned as the overarching structure connecting the Department of French, the Institute of French Studies, also founded by Tom in 1978, La Maison Française, and NYU Paris. As I'm sure many of you know, having been to previous events at the center, it's a hub for cultural and intellectual exchange between New York and the French-speaking world. It's a centre d'excellence recognized by the French government. And as its director, Tom has been honored multiple times by that government and awarded numerous prizes. The Center for French Civilization and Culture has staged at least one major cultural and academic event in France or the US every year since its inception, bringing together American and Francophone writers, scholars, and artists. These events have typically represented major interventions into and summations of important figures in contemporary French and Francophone culture. Among its highlights were 2 events at the Pompidou Center in Paris, Beckett dans le siècle in 1986 and Hommage à Samuel Beckett in 1990, as well as a Beckett Theatre Festival held in 1996 in collaboration with Lincoln Center. It's in tribute to these standout achievements of the center that this conference takes as its subject the global reach of French and Francophone theatre today, hailing Tom as a connoisseur, a critic and scholar, a teacher, and an impresario of theatre. As this is most certainly Tom's field and not mine, I'm going to call on him now to say a few words of introduction to this conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. And you know, it's very difficult for me to even begin to try to thank you and the department and the university for what you're doing these next 2 days. What a way to honor somebody. It's really quite extraordinary. I'm very moved and deeply grateful to you personally, Sarah, and to the whole department for doing this. I'm very, very deeply linked to the Department of French here, and to have it go out of its way to do this. A dinner would have been a great joy, but to do this is really quite fantastic. So, believe me, my thanks are very profound. My life has been closely linked to theater, to the French theater. Actually, I started off, I had a great professor of 17th century French theater, and I was ready to become a 17e-iste. Was all gung-ho on Racine, Corneille, and Molière. Have not forgotten that, of course, but I then had another fine professor who turned me on to the 20th century. And so I stuck with that turn on and carried it on ever since. It's been a great ride. The theater that I've been involved in has been, as far as I'm concerned, really a great period. The second half of the 20th century that I lived through has been a great moment of theater. The first half I spent a lot of time studying and working on. It was not bad either. I mean, when you think of people like Cocteau, whom many people don't like, but I always did, and Giraudoux and Anouilh and et cetera, et cetera. These are people I've spent an awful lot of time reading, working on, admiring, and defending in many ways. But like so many others, I was really swept up by the so-called new theater, the theater of the absurd. I think theater of the absurd may not be a great term, but it's better than any of the others. So it's the one that stuck, and you know, we live with that. And we had the, you know, I had the chance at least to see Ionesco's plays when they came out, and to get to meet Ionesco, and to meet Genet and Beckett, and these are people that I didn't only read, but I had a chance to become friends with and know for many, many years. So for me, this was more than just studying somebody, writing about somebody. It was also sharing a life and an experience, and that was pretty great. And the second half, you know, after that, after Genet, Beckett, and Ionesco, that is after about, let's say, 1975 or so, Beckett was still alive. Ionesco was late in his life, but their heyday was over. And, well, maybe not Beckett's. Beckett did some pretty great things at the very end of his life. I mean, like a year before he died. Quite amazing. But on the whole, the second half of the century, that is the last quarter, was kind of what happens after an avant-garde movement, which has always interested me. That is the avant-garde movement itself, which is that after an avant-garde movement succeeds, rarely does it succeed, in fact, but after it succeeds, it becomes absorbed, it becomes a classicism. Ionesco himself wrote a fabulous, for me, the best description ever of the avant-garde phenomenon. And he talked about the avant-garde being essentially a trader within the city who is fighting against what is being done by everybody else. But as soon as it works, as soon as it really manages to attract enough of an audience, et cetera, it becomes the new tradition and immediately inspires a new avant-garde to fight it. And that's what's been happening. It's been a very interesting, in the theater, certainly in the French theater, certainly, the American theater is very different. I've also been fascinated. I've not only been interested in French theater, my interest has gone out to other countries, and French theater, of course, cannot be contained in the hexagon, not only because there's French and Francophone theater. French theater is written in many countries where French is used and that are not France. But, of course, the borders are now porous, and fortunately so. When you think that somebody like Peter Brook settled in France and he had done some pretty good work in England before he moved to France. Not bad, but what he did in France in the 40 years since he's been working in France has been quite astounding. Maybe some of you had the chance just a week ago to see his 1 hour and 15-minute version of the 3-day-long Mahabharata, which he showed here at BAM. Fantastic. Ivo van Hove, who's now the hot director everywhere, in France, in the US, he works a lot here, he works in France, he's Flemish, he is all over the place. Borders don't mean much anymore, and languages don't mean much anymore, although what somebody like Van Hove or others do in one country is not necessarily the same thing that they do somewhere else, because there are different things. Anyway, I'm going on too long. I'm really trying simply to say what I've been working on, what I've been interested in, what I've had the chance to make the intellectual content of my life, and I've had a great chance to be able to do all of this at NYU, which has been a great host for intellectual ideas at NYU. I came to NYU, as I think Sarah said, in 1956, when NYU, frankly, was a second-rate institution. I've had the great joy of being here while it became an absolute first-rate institution. The only trouble with it is that in the early years, in the early 60s, there were very few really great departments at NYU. French was one of them. So we were one of 4 or 5 great departments. Now there are a lot of great departments, so we stand out less. We still get good support, but in the 60s, we got fantastic support from the university because there were not so many others to have any right for that claim. Anyway, NYU has been good, and working on all of this has been terrific for me, which I hope to continue doing for a little bit. And encouraged by this event, I hope to be able to do that. Sarah, thank you so much, and thank you all for sharing it with me.
Thank you so much, Tom. So we're going to vacate the platform now and cede it to the first pair of speakers, who are Judy Miller and Charles Isherwood. Before I introduce them, I have to announce a change in the published program. We had hoped to have Bill Irwin with us later this morning. Unfortunately, the movie that he's filming in Vancouver is still filming, and he was not therefore able to get away. And we're delighted that Lois Oppenheim, who is a former alum of this department and a distinguished professor in her own right now at Montclair, will join in conversation with Tom Bishop as the second part of this morning's program. So to move on quickly then, I'm delighted that we're able to host a visit from Charles Isherwood, who is an amazingly witty and discerning critic, whose recent take on global French theatre as Eurotrash will, I think, linger in the memories of many of us for a long time. He's going to be in conversation with Judy Miller, a colleague of ours here in French, professor of French, a great expert of French theatre, and active in both performance studies and literary studies, so a mediator between performing arts and the academic world. One of the forms in which that mediation has taken is that she's actually translated a large number of plays, and it's in that context too that she'll be important for her contribution later in the conference. So if we could make way, Tom and I, for Judy and Charles. Thank you. So you're on this side.
Okay, thanks, Sarah.
There's a fresh water.
Do you mind, do you mind if I mention that your ceiling is falling in?
No, I don't.
Okay, so as this is kind of appropriate, not very appropriate, but it's a sort of good joke, but it's not a joke on Charles Isherwood. His ceiling fell in last night. And so,
Not my fault, of course.
yeah. So we're going to raise the roof this morning, nevertheless, all with the ceiling having fallen in, on the question of French theater, Francophone theater, French language theater, in New York City. But that's not what we're starting with. We're starting with a kind of way of looking at what it means to be a theater critic. There are a number of students here who are in humanities, who are, I hope, will think about careers that will lead them to write and obviously lead them to think about literature and theater. So I think they can learn something from what Charles's experience has been like. And then we'll talk about global theater and the globalization of New York theater. And then we'll get to, was it obscurité, stupidité, et éternité?
I don't think I'm going to live that down, but that was referring to one production.
We know
Liz.
that. I know that. And frankly, I saw that production in Paris last fall, and I couldn't agree more. So let us start then. And so do you mind starting a bit by telling us how you began your career and what it means to be a theater critic in New York?
Well, lately the joke, since arts critics have increasingly been getting let go, I just say sheer bad luck is how I became a theater critic. I grew up more a cinephile, and Pauline Kael was a great influence. She, of course, you all know. I moved to Los Angeles and started seeing a lot of theater. There is actually a lot of theater in Los Angeles, shocking but true. And I started seeing a lot of theater, writing about it for Variety, which is a showbiz publication. And then when their chief critic in New York left, I was moved here. A few years later, I moved to the New York Times. I've been there about 12 years now.
Right. And can you talk to us a little bit about what your week is like as a person who's actually responsible for seeing I don't know how many plays a week and how many pieces you're supposed to get in a week and so on?
Well, we don't have quotas, thank God, or yet. But I generally see at least 5 plays a week. I don't write about all of them. Sometimes you're looking for a larger theme piece. Sometimes I'm seeing things that I'm not reviewing, but my colleague Ben is reviewing. But I see at least 5 or 6 shows a week.
And how many of you are there who are actual theater critics at the Times?
There are
now?
2 staff critics, Ben and me.
And then some. Then you have some freelancers that you.
We do, yes. We do have stringers, several of them, because there's so much theater in New York that we think is worth covering that obviously Ben and I can't handle it all.
Yeah. So this is just a small parenthesis, and it comes from a conversation last night with some of the French colleagues who are here, who are very concerned about what's happening to theater criticism, because it's not happening in France anymore. The major critics from some of the major papers are disappearing, and they're not being replaced. So this is a...
Well, that's what's happening in New York, too.
Yeah.
The New York Post just let go its theater critic, Elizabeth Vincentelli, who is actually from Corsica, so her first language is French.
Right, yeah.
So it's actually a global phenomenon. I mean, I don't know if it's happening in Mongolia, but even in London, critics are being let go and not replaced, or being made stringers. Um, there's, definitely a lot less money to go around because of those internets. They haven't figured out how to make up the money they're losing in mainly print advertising.
Yeah.
And so budgets are being squeezed, and arts coverage is one of the things that is really getting squeezed.
So are you paying any attention to the arts coverage on the internet?
Not, I mean, I look at The Guardian, I look at various other sites, but, I don't go trolling through there's so many blogs and chat sites, as they call them, where you hear really mean things said about you. So I don't spend every morning gauging the reaction to my latest review. But I do,
Yeah.
try to pay as much attention as I can.
No, and I think for everybody who's involved in print culture now and writing one way or another, what's happening on the internet is a kind of anxiety-producing for all of us and exciting at the same time. So with what we've just said, I think we still need to talk about what theater means, right? And what theater means in the context of the United States. That's another thing, another aspect I think that we'll be talking about within this conference, is what the place is of theater in France and in French language countries. But what is the place of theater in the United States? We're so privileged here in New York because we have so much of it, but what do you think?
Well, it has become a niche art form, of course. Film and television obviously have far more influence, far many more viewers. In New York, it's very important, certainly. But I do think that it plays a very important role. I mean, there's a lot of crossover now between playwrights and television writers. And I think theater is a really great, feeding ground for writers when they're earlier in their careers, discovering their voices. Unfortunately, too many of them, once they discover their voices and people enjoy hearing them, they do get swiped up by television and perhaps film, because there's obviously more money to be made there, because theater is not an easy profession to pursue full-time in the U.S., as I'm sure it probably isn't in most places.
No, it's not. But of course, the difference in France, and that makes a big difference, and I know this is going to be spoken about, is that the subsidy system is quite good. The government really believes in subsidizing the arts, not as much as the artists would wish, but still there's a lot more of an investment. And in that sense, I think we can say that the philosophical underpinning about what arts mean in that culture versus what arts mean in this culture is different, at least on the government level.
Absolutely. I mean, the Republicans have been trying to eliminate the NEA for I don't know how many years, and will continue to do so. It's just, that has never been part of our DNA, unfortunately. There have been attempts to establish versions of the National Theater, the Comédie Française, that have never really taken root. There's a commercialism that is at the heart of our country that really does not want to necessarily support things that are seen as being not necessarily money-making entities, shall we say.
Do you think there's any chance that there could be a kind of movement that would change that?
Frankly, no.
Yeah.
I really think the political culture right now is obviously very toxic and very polarized. So I think anything we can do to save what little we have is as much as is likely to happen. I don't think there's going to be a great groundswell of support for public arts funding.
And at the same time, do you think that something's going on in terms of the theater responding to this toxic climate? How organic do you think the theater is in terms of the New York theater, anyhow, in terms of responding to what's going on politically?
Well, I mean, you can look at certainly you see more radical views being represented in theater than you do very often on television or film. but I don't think there's been a concerted response, and perhaps there should be. I don't know how effective it would be, but I'm actually heartened by the fact that there's so much interesting theater going on, both off Broadway, off Broadway, and even on Broadway, as he had mentioned before. Of course, I've forgotten his name like a fool. Ivo van Hove 10 years ago would never have been
Broadway.
presented on Broadway. And we had 2 productions last season, which is really quite remarkable. In some ways, I think the theater in New York is getting more adventurous, which is important. Not necessarily around the country, but that's another story.
So that was really a question I'm quite interested in, because you've been at the Times for 12 years now, and you've been going to the theater 5 nights a week at least, and you have a real gauge on what's happening in theater in New York at least, and probably around the country too.
Yeah, I do a lot of
So-
stuff at regional theaters.
How there is evolution and there is movement, you think?
Yes,
Can
definitely.
you talk to us about that a bit?
Well, I don't know what exactly generated it. There are several factors, but during the 80s, Broadway was very much moribund. The theaters were in shabby shape. Times Square was a mess, blah, blah, blah. But because of various factors, people came together, both the theater owners who had a very, commercial interest in reviving Times Square. Broadway sort of revived, and even since I've been here for, a long time, 18 years, I guess, I've really seen a greater variety of productions presented on Broadway than I did in the beginning. It used to be, you'd see a lot of revivals, you still do. You'd see very commercial plays, but very few new plays. The musicals were fairly formulaic. Something like this little show called Hamilton, you may have heard of.
Yes, right.
That is not the kind of thing that would have been produced when I first came to New York on Broadway, or perhaps even off Broadway. So I do think that through various factors, the theater scene here has actually gotten more vibrant and in a way more reflective of what goes on in London and perhaps Paris than it used to be. It used to be more purely commercial and populist-oriented, and now there are certain venues where you can go and see no theater in English at all if you want.
And the audiences are good. The audiences are better than they've been.
I think so. I'm heartened by the fact that obviously a very bold musical like Hamilton is doing so well, but also by the fact that you will go to St. Anne's Warehouse. The three main venues that produce interesting international theater, I think St. Anne's Warehouse, obviously the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and the Lincoln Center,
Right.
where the festival brings in all sorts of theater from around the world. So, I think that's maintaining its position, if not even growing. So I think I'm hopeful on that front.
And do you think that those festivals that are growing, right, and the venues are getting larger, and we even have a French festival going on right now, the Crossing the Line
Yes.
Festival, with the Alliance Française. So do you think that the presence of those productions that come from elsewhere are having an impact on how theater is being done here?
It's hard to say. I hope so, because I think the artists who go to see them are probably influenced. I think the actual audience for this kind of theater is not necessarily exploding. It's maintaining itself, I think. There are always going to be people who want to see Hugh Jackman on Broadway and whatever he's doing, and they're not going to want to see anything at the Lincoln Center Festival. And that's, the majority that people are tending toward the Hugh Jackman side. But I do think the interest in international theater is maintaining itself through the efforts of the people at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, Arts at St. Anne's, even some smaller venues, like it used to be called Dance Theater Workshop, but it's called something else. Anyway.
So
New York Live
New
Arts,
York
yes.
Live Arts, yeah. So I've been wondering about what you think is happening with audiences when they do go to these kinds of productions. If there are, if from your perspective there are particular stumbling blocks that international productions can run into because of issues of reception on the part of American audiences, besides language.
Well, I mean, I think it's true that international theater in general is much more adventurous stylistically, in terms of design and multimedia use, which I think is all very healthy. But there are people who resist that and who basically want, 4 people in a living room talking about how sad they are. So I think, it's a little, there is some resistance to people who, might read a review of something in the New York Times or elsewhere that says this is a wonderful production by Minushkin or whoever. And they go and they're expecting traditional, what they think of as theater. And they are a little bouleversed and perhaps not pleased. But I do think that we have in New York, we have a large culture of people who absolutely are rabid for these kind of things.
Yeah, I think we even have some people in this room, including maybe yourself, who just spent 24 hours at St. Anne's Warehouse, right?
Oh, no. No, I had already seen 18 hours of that. I reviewed it, the first 6 hours of it that was presented last year, and then I saw another 9 hours. But I don't think I could have survived 24 hours of pretty much anything. I don't take amphetamines, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but so just thinking about the different kinds of work that's being done and what's being done here that I think is more avant-garde-like or more daring than some of the stuff that's going on in France, in any case. Taylor Mack would be that.
Yes, he certainly is all of those things.
And we've had a conversation with some of the people in the room about whether Taylor Mack could be produced in France. And there's some question about whether or not that could actually happen. But because the queer sensibility that he demonstrates and that is so remarkable in generating the kind of excitement about his work, it's not on the French stage now.
I'm sorry to hear that, because I think
somebody can contradict me if they think I'm wrong. Right?
Well, his current piece is about American pop music.
Right. But it's queered.
A lot of it. Oh, yes. It's very queered indeed. But he also writes actually very strong plays, and something like his play here, which was about a family. It's H-I-R. It's a long story. Anyway, a play like that, I think, which it has a transgendered character in it, but has a very wild, almost Ionesco-esque comic sensibility. I think that is the kind of play that France might accept if somebody was willing to produce it.
Right. That maybe it would be a good idea to talk about that. Yeah. So let's talk about France now and French theater in New York, of which you've seen quite a bit. Are there any artists, or are there any writers, any authors, any companies that you've been following that you're especially interested in?
Well, as I mentioned, Minushkin's Théâtre du Soleil has done 2 marvelous productions that I've seen. What I find fascinating, looking back with more than 10 years now, in 2005, she presented a 2-part piece about refugees.
Right.
Remember?
Yes, yes.
Le Dernier...
Caravansérail.
You do that word, yeah.
Right.
It's amazing to me that it was a very powerful piece of work, but it obviously was also very prescient. Somehow she had tapped into something that has now become, obviously for various reasons, a huge global phenomenon and that is driving politics everywhere. I mean, this is an artist who is a visionary in terms of, I think, both style and also substance. And she also did this wonderful piece, Les Éphémères, which also long, but intimate and really powerful in the way it examined, for me, how we have to, part of theater is making us pay attention not to just sort of, the arc of a life or a drama, but the details of life and how they sort of add up and have meaning, without necessarily being like, oh, they got married, they got divorced. This was a very intimate drama about details of people's lives that I thought was phenomenal. I have not seen enough of the Comédie Française. I know they did, I want to say, Little Lavar, I don't remember.
Here?
At BAM, maybe 10 years ago.
I don't, maybe.
I think that's the only one that I've seen here.
Well, the very difficult problem for the Comédie Française is that they're in repertory.
Mm-hmm.
So to get the actors to come with the show and take the time off to do it would be really hard, because there was probably one of the most extraordinary productions at the Avignon Festival last year was a festival of was a production with actors from the Comédie Française of The Damned, which was the scenario from the Visconti film that was done.
Oh, is this
And it was
another
directed. It was
Van
directed by
Hove,
Ivo Van Hove. Yes, it's still Ivo Van Hove, and it was.
He's everywhere.
It was truly, truly amazing. And the director of the Avignon Festival is here, and he should be applauded for bringing that in. It was really great. And,
I hope it comes here. I think it's
well,
supposed to come here.
we all said that all of us who were there all wanted it to come, but this is again the problem of getting the actors to be able to come away from what they're doing in repertoire.
Yeah. Well, that's
So-
another thing we lack, unfortunately, in our country is any repertory companies, essentially, except the Ashland Shakespeare Festival. That's something that I think is really a lack, but it's because of finances. It's just a very expensive proposition, and when you have subsidies from the state, it's obviously much easier.
Yeah, and of course the Comédie Française, even the Comédie Française apparently is finding its budget slashed some, but in comparison to what our theater companies have here, it's quite extraordinary. So I have another question, because I have been particularly interested in certain playwrights that have come to New York, or their productions have come to New York, productions of their plays, and you haven't liked them at all. So,
Oops.
maybe with reason, but this is where I think there could be some issues with just conventions of accepting theater. So I know that you're not a great fan of Marguerite Duras, for example.
That would be true.
Yes.
Although I haven't, obviously I read The Lover. Was that her big hit?
It was her big popular hit for sure.
Yeah. A lovely little book. But she's the avant-garde is not my specialty, shall we say. So she's not perhaps my favorite.
But it seems to me that what I'm recalling of your reviews of also Wajdi Mouawad's Scorched, which you saw at the Wilma a few years ago.
I did, yes.
Yeah. That in all of those instances, what I think was disturbing to you is that you felt that nothing was happening. That in fact, if I can cite you from the Scorched interview, you said that all of the characters talked as though they were French professors.
Well, I did go to school in France, so I know whereof I speak briefly. That particular play, I don't remember all that well. I do remember it being a bit talky. On the other hand, another French playwright I don't particularly like, Yasmina Reza, has had great success here.
I'm actually interested to know that she has had great success.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, my take on Yasmina Reza is that she writes theater that can be successful anywhere.
Yes.
Because she has a kind of formula so that if people are doing projectile vomiting in Brooklyn or in Tokyo, it doesn't make any difference. It's the same thing.
It's equally delightful everywhere.
Yeah.
But she also writes, I think Art was actually a very
She's a good playwright. Of
artful
course she's
play,
a good playwright.
and she writes plays that fit more easily into the standard formula for Broadway. They are essentially domestic comedy dramas. It's the more avant-garde work that I think, people resist, and sometimes including me.
I'm going back to something I said earlier about some of the things that are happening that in New York are very exciting to me and are not happening in France right now. I think are not happening to the extent that I'd like them to happen. You mentioned Hamilton, which is a very extraordinary show, as you all know, because probably almost everybody here has had it or tried to get a ticket to it, because the actors are almost all people of color. And that sort of investment in actors who from a different background with the money to put on a kind of production like this and say that all of our founding fathers are all of our founding fathers, is something that isn't happening in France right now. And there is a movement that I'm going to be talking about tomorrow about democratizing the stage in France and getting more actors of color on stage. But this seems to be one of the things that's really remarkable that's happening in New York right now. And one of your recent reviews were about women playwrights, African-American women playwrights who are doing such great work.
Well, yes, and it's interesting to me because, I don't want to make any generalizations. Hillary Clinton got in trouble for using that word. But I do think it's interesting that some of the most exciting new plays being written right now are by African-American women. They're being produced in New York on major stages. I do think our New York theater culture, and even across the country, is very much aware of widening the scope in terms of race. We don't see enough colorblind casting, I don't think. I mean, obviously in Hamilton, certainly. But I would like to see more of that. But I do think that the success of Hamilton will have a trickle-down effect in the sense that people will be more willing, producers will be more willing to look at classic plays without a filter of color in front of them. Look at The Crucible. Sophie Okonedo, I believe her name was.
Yes,
It's
she was
not a
great.
traditional, casting for the part of Mary Proctor. I think it was Mary. Anyway, and that was on Broadway. It's not just, tiny little theaters off Broadway.
So, but this is also an issue with the realist aesthetic, right? Because when Death of the Salesman gets done, it has to be all black actors. At this point, if it's going to be done, it has to be all black actors doing Death of the Salesman. There can't be that. At this point, we're not allowing that kind of mixity, I don't think.
Yeah, well, I have seen one, and it didn't work. And I really felt it would have been better if it were, done colorblind casting, because if you're doing Death of a Salesman with an all-black cast, you're making a statement about those times that doesn't necessarily fit what Arthur Miller was actually saying, and it puts a layer of meaning on top of the play that sometimes doesn't fit. That's why I feel like, I don't want to see an all-white version of an August Wilson play, that's for sure.
Right. Yes,
But he's also a special case. He's writing so specifically about the Black American experience. I don't think a playwright like August Wilson would necessarily benefit from colorblind casting. It's not something that can be just sort of paintbrushed across every single play. But
Yeah.
Shakespeare, obviously, a great example. I know you love him in France.
Shakespeare, yes. We do love Shakespeare in France.
Do you? That's
Oh, yes.
Oh.
But
well.
I
The
mean,
cliche is that he was never properly appreciated in
Oh,
France.
my goodness, no. And there are a lot of French theater people here who will tell you that they're doing productions or they're looking at translations of Shakespeare. It's one of the hardest things with Shakespeare, of course, is translating him.
Of course.
He cannot be translated correctly.
Well,
So-
translation is a very difficult issue.
Yeah.
Yasmina Reza is one thing. Shakespeare
Is
or
something else, yeah.
or Racine or anything else is very different.
But you can get closer to Racine, I think, than even to Shakespeare because of the depth of the wordplay, and even for American audiences, of course, even for an American audience to really understand Shakespeare, understand the depths of the Shakespearean language is very difficult.
Yes, I mean you need a footnote for every line. You sometimes feel, and yet, of course, obviously the essentials always come through in a good production. You don't necessarily need to understand every single word that's being spoken to get the power, the beauty, the meaning of these plays. So I'm glad to hear that it was a cliche that, Shakespeare was not appreciated in France the way he was in, say, Germany or elsewhere.
Oh, I don't think that's true at all. And I mean, certainly he wasn't appreciated until about the middle of the 19th century, or he was boulderized.
That's when I was born, so.
Yeah, he was boulderized, and he was poorly translated. And if I'm remembering my theater history correctly, when Othello was first done and the word mouchoir, the handkerchief, right, was pronounced on stage, it practically caused a riot because one didn't use that kind of language on stage.
Ah.
But you know, she was smothered with something. So anyhow, that's so. I want to go back to your writing. When Sarah introduced you, she said you were quite witty, and I think you are witty. I think you're acerbic. I think every piece is extremely interesting. There's nothing boring about your writing. How long does it take you to write your criticisms?
Well, thank you very much, first of all. I mean, I've written some very boring reviews. I can point you to them if you really want to know. But it usually takes 2 to 3 hours to write the review, and then there's a process of refinement, as there always is when you're writing, as I'm sure you know. But I like to actually, get up the next morning. We don't have to do what critics in London do, where you rush out of the theater and in 45 minutes type out your review.
Yes,
So I have a night to hopefully sleep, and I get up the next morning, write for 2 or 3 hours, revisit it later in the day, and usually turn it in either that day or the next. We have a certain luxury here. I don't know what the convention is in France, but
I don't know. I'm not quite sure either, but I think it's a pretty quick turnaround.
yeah, I mean, we sometimes can see a play 2 or 3 or even more days before we have to turn in our reviews, and there's arguments about whether that's good or bad. But in general, I think it's good. It improves. The more you can think about a play and maybe even take a look at the text, I think the deeper your insights might be and the more, eloquent your responses might be, in theory.
I think that theater criticism in France has moved in various ways, but there was a period of time in which the theater criticism were really more like theater essays. And you knew that the critic had read the play many times before, and it was always a he, pretty much always a he, went to see the theater piece. And then you'd have a whole contextualization of where the text came from. There was a lot of space. And Le Monde, which has changed a lot as a publication, used to have 3 pages every week on culture with wonderful, wonderful reviews. And this is completely stopped now.
Oh, really? Well, how much do they cover now?
So now I think there's a 1 day a week in which there is some theater criticism, if I'm not mistaken. Right, Phil? How about 1 day a week? Yeah. A little bit more than that, yeah.
That's alarming.
Yeah.
Although things are exactly the same here. I mean, the Times is now, the culture department, this is a big secret, so don't tell anyone, is undergoing something of a cultural revolution. We're having to redesign our pages. They're very much, trying to change the way we write about arts in general. So there may be fewer small reviews, more, as you say, essayistic pieces. But we're still maintaining, or so I'm told, our commitment to writing about theater in depth and at great length. But we may also come to the point where there's a page of theater reviews 1 day a week, a page of dance reviews 1 day a week, etc. We're all under a lot of pressure.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess I'd like to ask you what you'd like to see happening in the theater now. Do you have a kind of ideal vision of where it might go?
Well, I think actually one thing that is perversely good about the huge explosion of television, we're in a golden age, there are more writers being encouraged to write for whatever dramatic form we're talking about. I think that will improve the quality of playwriting because it becomes a little bit more central. Also, as much as we like to bemoan the fact that Broadway is often full of stars doing revivals to, refurbish their careers or just add a little more glow. I do think that brings a certain amount of attention to theater that it didn't have for many years. I hope that continues. I hope it continues to be more adventurous than opportunistic. But I can't say I have a grand vision for what the American theater should become. It's an evolving art form, as all art forms evolve. Its death knell has often been sounded, but I don't think it's in danger of going away. In fact, as I said, what's surprising to me is how robust it is compared to when I first came here.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's something going on in American theater right now that's very exciting. But I don't think, and I don't have any claims of being an expert on American theater, I don't think there's any way of classifying it in one particular way. In France, there's a tendency to want to think about American theater as just kind of flat realism, and therefore unperformable in France, which is a very curious kind of thing, but there's very little performance of American texts, especially classical texts, in France. Although all of a sudden, I'm told that Tennessee Williams is starting to be done again, and Arthur Miller as well. So there seems to be a way in which the French theater people think that they can come to grips with those kinds of texts now, which was not the case for a very long time. And I think it does have something to do with actor training. So to get back to why I suspect maybe the Duras pieces that get done by American actors, or even the Muawa that you saw in Wilma might not have felt very good to you. I'm not sure if this is true, but I'm not sure that there's enough American actor training. There is some, of course, for people for actors to let go of incarnation of roles and speak the text. Because a lot of what French theater is about how beautiful the text is. It's the language. So,
Well, Tennessee Williams, certainly. I don't know how he works in translation. I've never read a French translation, but certainly how you speak the text. He's a very lyrical writer, as we know. So I would think that he would really be a more natural fit than, say, Arthur Miller but also Edward Albee. The precision and elegance of his language.
Albee's done, and Horowitz is done.
Oh, that's interesting.
Horowitz has done a lot. Yeah, so it's of American, to use that word, Tom, absurdist, to get done in France. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
He's done more in France than in the
Horowitz, yeah, he is. Yeah.
that's interesting. I mean, he's a very prolific playwright. In fact, the last play I reviewed was set in France, I believe.
Yeah, this one that had the last summer's production. Yeah.
It was the Cherry Lane Theater.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That you didn't like that one very much.
No, apparently I don't like anything.
Yeah, but I read that one. I think, I can understand why you might not have. I would like to open up the questions to the audience now. I'm sure some of you might like to engage with Charles Isherwood and have some questions. Yeah, here comes a mic.
Oh, fancy.
Thank you so much. Yes, wonderful. I'm just so delighted with your talks. Thank you so much. Yes, the question of Duras and, let's say, Vinaver and other wonderful, extraordinary, poetic, contemporary French writers, whether they're women or men, coming here to this country and not being appreciated, which Judy has said some very interesting things about. It's something that bothers me a lot, and people ask me all the time, why don't we have contemporary French playwrights here, even in New York or elsewhere? I wondered if you could talk a little bit more, Mr. Isherwood, about what is it about someone like Duras that you just can't get, if I may use that term.
Well, I haven't seen that much of her work, so I cannot specifically address that. I think, in general, there certainly is a wider acceptance of more theater that fits more traditionally into American modes. I think well-produced international theater will always succeed. You look at the Complicité, the London company that is now actually on Broadway, strangely enough. these kind of things, if they're well produced and strike a chord, are wonderful. But I think in the case of Duras and the other playwrights you mentioned, whom I don't even know, I think what matters is the quality of the production more than anything else. If you do a play that's, perhaps challenging for American audiences without the level of quality that it requires, you don't have a chance, because you really need that sort of combination of someone who deeply understands the style the writer is working in and can actually make it somehow translate into an American vernacular or just an American theatrical style. It's probably easier, but it's a challenge. I mean, I wish I saw more interesting stuff. David Ives is a comic playwright. He wrote Venus in Fur on Broadway. He doesn't adapt contemporary plays, as far as I know, but he does. He's done a couple Molières and a Regnard, and they've been actually quite successful at regional theaters and here in New York. And he has a sensibility that I think, it's very hard to translate those plays. I mean, Richard Wilbur is sort of the gold standard for some of it. But I think David Ives has made inroads into making these plays very accessible to American audiences, and I hope he continues to do that. And I think he will, because he's a very brilliant writer.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sure that Arthur Nogiciel, who's here, I believe, could speak of this, because he is one of the rare people who has succeeded in bringing French language theater to this country and working with American actors. Arthur, where are you?
Arthur is back there. Would you like to speak to this?
Well, he's going to have to anyway.
Thank you. It was interesting to listen, because it feels like, I don't know if sometimes when we speak of theater, you speak about text or forms, and I always have this double meaning. Do we talk about French text and language, or do we speak about French theater as also a form and an aesthetics? When it comes to Duras, and when you were talking about Duras, I thought of Coltès, because I had the chance to stage Coltès twice here. And one of the main problems I had to face when I started to work was the translation. And I don't know, I only read Duras two times in English, so I wouldn't do a whole thesis about that. But I wonder also how it's translated, and how are the translations that can also sometimes be some weird betrayal of the text itself, because also some translators translating from a language to another translated with their own views on theater. And the way we can think theater in France may be different from the way English people would think of theater. And so when you have, let's say, English translators translating Coltès, which is very French in many ways, then you can have real problems. And some translations that I've read of Coltès, for instance, were with a real denial of the punctuation, a denial of how the characters were talking to each other. So in a way, they transformed the play into something that could please more a local audience, but at the end, it's something else, and it's something that is just a remembrance of what it was. So I don't know what we're talking about right now, because the translation is a main issue when it comes to theater, if we think that theater is the text and the poem that's written. So translation is something that matters a lot, and I think there's a talk about it tomorrow or this afternoon.
There is. I mean, there is, but I think that there are two kinds of translation. The more I think about this, the more I've really decided that there's some truth to this. The two forms of translation, or there's a kind of imbricated translation that has to happen, not just the text, but also the theater space itself, the act of theater,
Right.
because it's an issue of conventions, and American audiences will just go so far in accepting something that's extremely out of their ken, I think. And they're also the issues of it's such an organic thing, theater, and the actors have to be able to do the form that they're presented as well. So you've worked with American actors, and you know I saw your production of Splendide, for example, and you know some of those actors got it, but I would say that some of those American actors didn't quite get what you wanted from that. I think
Really,
it's hard.
I think they really got it. It's just they were amazing, and I think they really got it. After then, you can just not like it or feel it, but for me, they were amazing. I think theater has to do with rhythm also. And so if there's something in the translation or an awareness of the rhythm or the musicality of the text that's not here, then and that's what happens in some translation, they try to make it more realistic or more psychological than it is. And at the end you have soap operas, whereas if you can really handle the rhythm, the form, the shape of the text itself, you respect it, then the actors, they know where to go, because it's the text that will give the actors also a certain way of being on stage, that will give them density, that will give them consistency. And if the text become too flat, too realistic, or too mundane, or let's say too easy, then if you add the fact that some actors here, but not only here, the fact that they have this very realistic or characters way of thinking, their part, then you end up with something that is, I don't know, very, maybe realistic or psychological.
This is what I was referring to when I was referring to this complexity about not knowing how to speak the text, right, and needing to incarnate it, which is something I'd like to see changed in actor training in the United States, so there'll be more of that. Yes.
Hi. Several things. You said something about how in France American texts are seen as being flat, and I would say, did you say that?
I don't think I said flat. No, I think there's. But I'd really like to hear from some of the French directors who are here. But on the whole, American realistic theater has been very little produced in France.
Okay, but two things. So there was a marvelous production of Cocteau's. It was here in the States. It was called Indiscretions, and it was about 20 years ago on Broadway, which was really a fabulous production. And so for me, it's not so much about the translation. It's really something about Mr. Isherwood said about how it's produced. And yeah, Broadway could throw all these bells and whistles at it, but it still was really beautiful. But then about 2 or 3 years ago, there was a production of Pascal Rambard's The End of Love, which I found really, really difficult to sit through because it was mainly, as I would say, flat and rather talky. And that might have been just the production itself, because the production was very flat. But for me, it's really not so much the text itself, because the text could just be read. It's how that text is embodied. And I think then again, that might be a cultural thing too. Maybe in France, audiences are more willing to sit and listen, whereas perhaps American audiences like a little bit more vibrant stage action.
I mean, this is my opinion. I think there is something of that French audiences are willing to sit and listen, and that American audiences come with a different kind of energy to the theater and expect something else. I mean, this is just experiential that I'm saying, that my own experience of it. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I think to address issues he raised, I do think when a translator is trying to basically make a text more appealing to an audience in another country, you're running into trouble. I think it's probably better to be as stylistically correct as you can. It's better for the playwright, it's ultimately better for the audiences. But there's also the truth that American acting, is often talked about in comparison to, say, British acting, more than French. It's more emotionally related, psychological, the method, acting, history is great here. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily work for texts that don't fit that template. And so you get a certain discordance between the way the actors are, earnestly and honestly trying to approach the text and what the text is really asking of them. And, theoretically, it's the director's, responsibility to bridge that gap. But I do think that there's, a problem with American acting training in that it's not necessarily ideal for many types of international theater. So
Yeah. That's
trouble ensues.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, but.
May I?
But please, Tom.
I think there's really a kind of a basic cultural difference and a unhappy cultural difference in the sense that there's a cultural protectiveness that both France and the United States audiences and, well, the whole context play. That is, and that's true in the theater, it's true to some degree in the novel too, that we like things coming here if they are if they're just like what we do here, and we're not willing to see what is being done elsewhere. And I think in France, there's a lot to that too. They don't want to see realistic American plays. They do go for people like Albee and et cetera. That went well, but there is the unfortunate desire to look abroad if it's just like what we do at home. In the novel here, for instance, that's very much the case. Publishers will publish French novels if they're like American novels, which is ridiculous. Why do that? Why not publish French novels which are not like American novels? But that's not the way it works. And I think on stage it's pretty much the same thing, and it's not a happy situation. And I think that may explain Duras, who is certainly not like, Duras' play is not like an American play. And most of the French plays, okay, right now, of course, in France, on the whole, I'm exaggerating, but I'll talk about it later. There are no more playwrights left. Nobody's writing plays anymore. They're writing, anyway, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah,
But
I think you'll get some pushback on that
I
one.
know.
There-
I fully expect it.
There's a question back here.
Thank you. Hi. I just want to echo that it's so wonderful to hear this conversation. It's always a great delight to hear Mr. Isherwood talk. I'd like to veer the conversation a little bit to something that's been on my mind in terms of global work, which has to do with context. My company over the last year has been touring a work internationally, and I've noticed a greater amount of concern around the subject of contextualizing pieces that are coming from abroad, whatever the configuration is. What has been surprising has been the extent of that conversation. We have been in places, say in Poland, where it was really weighted heavily that there be critics giving context before the piece. We then went to Chile, where there was this incredible amount of context that I was so uncomfortable with, so much so that there was 30 minutes before the show started, somebody stood up and walked the audience through our piece and said, essentially, in Act 3, you're going to feel this way because the style they're using, right? And in different places, there were different ways of addressing this notion of context under the assumption that were you to be in the US, you would view this work in such and such a way. I'm very curious as to, one, if you see a change in awareness around this, I'll call it concern of context, and two, what your thoughts are around that, and if there's a role that the producer or the artist or the critic should play in contextualizing works that are traveling internationally.
Well, I do think a certain amount of contextualizing is obviously helpful. Normally it just comes down to a program note that nobody reads, unfortunately. The New York Times, I do think, tries, it used to try a little harder when we had more culture pages, to write about interesting international work before it arrives, interviewing the director or whatever, to give people a sense of what it is, what its purpose is. I think we should do more of that, but I don't know, what the specific problems were with your piece. You know, from country to country, it sounds like it was very different. But I do think you don't want to as you say, over contextualize something when you're basically told this play means this, that, and the other, and you know, here's the significance. But I do think we could do better at, you know, putting international theater and expectations of it into the public discourse, so that people aren't just wandering into the latest. Even something like the Ivo van Hove productions, or you know, The Encounter, which is the Complicité show. You know, those kind of shows maybe do need a little more, especially when you're on Broadway, do need a little more, shall we say, hand-holding for the audience before they go in, so that they know not to expect just another production of The Crucible, or just another production of, you know, something that's hot in London. Because most of the things that are hot in London are things like, you know, Les Lieux Dangereuses. So I hope that, that probably didn't help you at all, but I talked a bit.
Yeah, but it is a quite, it's interesting in the sense that it means that the audiences, at least in these countries that you're going to, are hungry to see something else. But there's also the theater people there are making an effort to try and make sure that their audiences are going to get what they're producing. So that's positive. And I think a lot of our theaters are also having those kinds of talkbacks, or right? Or,
yes, it's a huge thing now. Talkback. I mean, you can't get away from a talkback these days. Or a talk pre, or a talk during. But I think in general it is healthy, because the theater does need to continue to develop new audiences, and we can't just rely on the same traditional audiences who are, you know, famously, you know, graying and white and middle class. We need to really do much more to find ways to speak to new audiences here. And actually, I think younger audiences, more diverse audiences would actually be far more open to international theater, which is done in different styles, because they don't come to theater with, you know, years of expectations. They basically are going in because, you know, hey, maybe this is something interesting that I might like, and maybe it turns out to be a rap musical that is brilliant and everyone likes. But there's a lot of other stuff that I think younger audiences are much more open-minded, and we don't do enough to get them to see international theater, American theater, any theater. But I'm not in development, audience development, so I don't know what the answer is to that question.
well, part of the audience is inexpensive theater tickets.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a whole other issue. Yeah. Yes.
You will excuse me for my very bad English, please. But I wanted to say that I think that the French theater goes on in the tragic way. France is a tragic country in the sense of the influence of Greece. We are a tragic country. And the theater in France is a tragic theater. I think that the Puritanism way of America has a great influence on the theater who is more psychological. And there is a fight between these two kinds of theaters. And I must add that today I think that the great fight is between the book and the image. Because the book, in the sense of our tradition with the Judeo-Christianism, is a very great in peril. And I don't want that image kills the book. And today, it is what we can be afraid for, because the writer, for instance, begin to write for the image, or I think it is the contrary that must be done. it is that the image in Hollywood, they must serve the book, but not the contrary. And there is, I think, a very great peril in that question.
Well, you raise a lot of questions there, in fact. I do think when you're talking about the French theater being in the tragic mode or inheriting the tragic mode from classicism, American tends to be more, as you say, I wouldn't say puritanical, but moralistic, shall we say. So there's a divergence there. When you're talking about the images versus text, is that essentially what you were saying, that images are now becoming predominant and books are becoming, you know, I think that's an absolute problem that may affect the theater in certain ways. I do think there's much more emphasis on multimedia productions that are not text-driven. The more you can have an immersive experience where you're walking around a building and seeing things happening, and text is virtually immaterial in some of these shows. I don't know if you've seen Sleep No More, the version of Macbeth, supposedly, that's being produced and has been a huge hit. But it's virtually, there's literally almost nothing of Hamlet, Macbeth rather. It could have been Hamlet for all I know. There's virtually nothing of Macbeth in that play, and yet it's hugely successful because it depends on this sort of immersive experience where you're getting to explore, you're getting to look at interesting images, and I do think we're definitely in a moment. It's no secret, you know, people are clicking on, you know, Instagram all the time. A story that you put up on Facebook will get much more attention if it's attached to a video or an image. And I'm a person who comes from the, you know, the written word tradition. I would almost always rather be reading a book than, you know, watching anything on YouTube, frankly. So, you know, we are at a cultural crossroads, but there's also some hopeful indications. I think reading actually has not, you know, declined the way we thought it would when the ebook was introduced. So, and I also wanted to refer to, I mean, I do believe that we don't get enough interesting French literature or international literature at all. You know, the sensational things like Michel Houellebecq, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, that's right. Perfect.
Once or twice, one or the other was right.
The last
you
one
know,
was perfect.
he, you know, he's certainly been, you know, given a lot of attention, but, you know, for all we know, there are dozens more interesting, adventurous writers that are not being translated. And I don't know if it works the other way. I mean, how many American novelists are popular?
A lot. There,
Really?
I think if my statistics are right, Laurent probably knows this. 25% of French literature, of literature that gets published in France, is translated. So
Is it all the girl on the train or the
No.
girl who whatever? The
it's-
dragon tattoo, you know what?
Yeah, oh, that gets translated, but that gets translated into everything,
Yes,
right?
that's true.
No,
Swahili.
I mean, our writers are picked up. They're translated. People bring them over. They're very interested in American literature. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm happy to hear that. I hope they're.
There's a much more cosmopolitan sense of literature in France than there is here. Much
I'm
more.
curious though. You know, there are some interesting writers who are working in styles that I think would be very interesting to you know, European audiences, such as Will Eno. Do you know Will Eno's work?
Yeah.
It's very much language driven.
Yes. Laurent, do you have Will Eno? Are you translating Will Eno? Will Eno? No.
Well, you should be. And Sarah Rule. Who?
Sarah
Sarah
Rule? No. Sarah Rule? No. Naomi Wallace. Who are some? Who?
Ugh, sorry.
Yes, and I have to apologize for my bad English also. but I'll try to do it my best. Yeah, I'm running an international translation center in France, which is something quite specific about the reunion of over 100 translators from all languages of the world who are translating into French and specialized into theater. So that means language and forms, of course. Mostly modern, contemporary playwrights, but also classicals. Yes, about American. What I wanted to say before about Shakespeare and Tennessee Williams, for instance, it has been the same problem as with other big European playwrights like Ibsen or like Brecht or like Chekhov. It's always, and Arthur is right, it's always a question of translations. It's always a way you get on the original text and you transfer it from its cultural environment into yours. And that means it's very specific. You have to get on the vocabulary, the rhythm, the punctuation, a lot of stuff, and you have to be curious about where it comes from and how it can lead, how it can come in your country. And yes, we missed for a very long time Tennessee Williams because we were convinced that Tennessee Williams was what Elia Kazan made of it in A Streetcar Named Desire. This kind of realism and this kind of, but still, as we are going on working on it, and discovering more about Williams and about Williams telling about his own theater, which should not be realistic, we're going on investigating how to translate him properly. And the last translations of Tennessee Williams, the Glass Menagerie, for instance, have been produced in a way that reveals Tennessee Williams as a non-realistic author, and this is a good point. And we did the same with Shakespeare, with an older tradition. Of course, Shakespeare was first translated in the 18th century, the period of Voltaire, and he was translated into the French canon, the French versification, Alexandrin and so on, of course, which didn't fit at all. But now we have over 200 years of discovering, and we have very big and good translators of Shakespeare in France, which makes, I have one at my side, which makes that the productions are more and more discovering other options and other ways, and another way of the Shakespeare knowledge about it. And about contemporary authors in France, we have Mac Wellman, we have Naomi Wallace, we have Susan Laurie Parks, we have Gregory Moss, Adam Rapp, Rajiv Joseph, Paula Fogel.
That's interesting.
Yeah, Maxwell. Yeah.
They tend to be the more
Foreman. Yeah, of course.
The more avant-garde. Most of those people you mentioned have been the more avant-garde writers who have not found huge audiences here. So I'm very happy for them. But it does speak to a cultural divide that hopefully we can bridge in some ways a little more. And I might like Naomi Wallace more in French if I had the chance to see her. It's entirely possible. Anyway, I really must run.
I know. So I think we'll have to wrap this up now. And Charles has to get back to his ceiling.
No, I'm going to lunch at Le
I know
Bernardin.
he's going to Le Bernardin for lunch, so that's very nice.
On my parents, not me, believe me.
So can we thank him very much for being with us today?
Thank you for having me. So nice to meet you.
This is great.
I'm sorry I had to rush out, but
Okay.
when family only comes twice a year,
I know, and then you have everything happen at once, which
you
is
know, I know.
so.
It's not one thing, it's another.